understands this, but few seem to do it. If you don't like the status quo,
start asking questions.
One of his quotes, and again, this is a basic quote, but he gets credit for it. I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I am not. And I think that's, a different root in what we were talking. Yeah, it's a general quote, but if you look it up, he gets credit for it. I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I am not. And that's what I would have written on this, but it would have been way too small. I don't think the camera would have seen it, so I wanted to explain it. Again, the best songwriter of his generation, completely misunderstood by a wide variety of the audience. And granted, he took his own life, and everybody sees that like, okay, and you definitely see it, and you hear it in his voice, and you see it in his lyrics, like he was tortured.
After.
But at the same, after, exactly. And everybody sees it now as like, oh my God, like he was one of the best ever, but in his time, was he appreciated? Yes. Nirvana was the #1 band, I think, in the world at that point in 1991, like right there with Michael Jackson when it came to the top of the charts. But I don't think he got the respect he deserved in that sense of, oh, he's just a crazy person. We were talking about Kanye before we came on here, like people
he always comes up.
Misinterprets him for being just a crazy son of a bitch, but like you don't know what makes him tick. And obviously what makes him tick is him being true to himself, because that's the reason he got to where he was. He was finally acknowledged as someone who beats, or his heart beats to the, what's that saying? I'm going to mess it up. He beats to his own drum, and that sense of, I know you don't like this word authenticity, because if you say it on the air, it's like, you don't mean it. Yeah. But, staying true to yourself, like you and you alone are the only version of you, right? And that's kind of a broad way to say it, but your own identity is shaped by you believing in yourself, your own values, your own opinions, your own takes, as opposed to saying, yeah, that's, like, and I've heard you have conversations, the one with Taylor Ringgold that you had on here, talking about, people in the comments section saying like, yeah, that sucked. And then someone's just like, yeah, you're right. That's awful, because people are too afraid to give their own opinions, their own takes, their own thoughts, their own values, because of what other people might say or think of them. Even people that don't necessarily care what other people think of them, they're thinking like, this isn't going to help me. This isn't going to help my brand.
People on the other end also take it too seriously, though, too, like content creators.
Yeah.
They don't realize it's usually a reflection on that person, or sometimes they're literally like just kidding and sideswiping, which is also kind of a reflection on them. But I've never totally understood why people get so up in arms about that. I generally find it funny and usually treat it as such. Yeah. If someone attacks like the brand, quote unquote, of the show, like tries to say it's a scripted podcast or something publicly, I make sure I respond publicly to that, right, and, burn the forest down to make sure they understand that's not the case. But usually when it comes to like opinions or takes, I'm like, hey man, what's your take? Put it here. Or like sometimes if they're clearly a lost cause, I'll send them hearts. Like, I don't know that I would have had that presence of mind to think of it that way if I were 20. No. I in fact, I'll go so far as to say I absolutely would not have. I would have taken it all so personally. So when I see some of these kids blowing up when they're 15, 16, 17, I empathize with that heavy, because like I can't imagine having all those hormones going through my brain and seeing these random people on the internet tell me I'm the second coming of Hitler, or whatever it is they say, like ridiculous things. It's unnatural. It's hard to deal with. But I think as time goes on and the older you get, you kind of realize, like, who the fuck is... There's literally some guy like Penis Dog 420. like who is this person behind this @ symbol that has a blank account and is making these comments? And by the way, Penis Dog 420, I don't know if you've been nasty on there. I just remember that name because it was fucking wild. But like, people, you have to think about where it comes from. And then, by the way, it's also... sometimes it's not even a real person. Like it's a bot account. So I don't know. I keep it in perspective, but it's it's a very weird thing when you have an audience you can't see. Speaking to some of these people who have had that attention.
Just hide behind their accounts.
Yeah, and they get bothered by it, and they're not thinking of it that way. They're not thinking, this is just someone hiding behind their account, man. And I wish they would. I wish the celebrities would, because their life would be a lot less stressful if they did.
I think there's a lot of celebrities out there that have taken that into account and be like, I never look at the comments, but like every now and then, like you'll hear like comedians be like, all right, let's listen to some of the feedback. And then, immediately you just get triggered. Just like, oh, someone doesn't like my stuff. Like, oh, that really hit home. Just the way they said it, but like, I don't understand what makes people think that way, to think just like I'm never on, like do you have a Twitter account?
I do. Yeah.
Do you actually go after people or like tweet on a daily basis, like what's going on in your life?
My Twitter account have kept pretty private. I just kind of like am on there doing whatever. But yeah, like I'm not a shit talker on Twitter. I'll put some opinions out. A lot of opinions I don't put them out on Twitter. It's just whatever. I let it simmer. But I'm not. You get me. My name is on my Twitter. I'll tell you what I think, and if I want to come at something, like, it's there in the open publicly.
Yeah,
that's really what. And then I'll engage in the conversation. But I'm not. I mean, I see what people do on Twitter. I don't do any of that shit.
The worst is the subtweeters.
Yeah.
Wish you would have been different. Like, what?
Yeah. Twitter is a very weird beast. It has a lot of... Twitter is the place where I think sometimes you can actually learn the most about people if they actually have their name on the account, because there's enough of a separation from the imagery of society that they feel comfortable to say things that maybe they wouldn't even say on Facebook or Instagram or definitely TikTok or something like that. And so there's good and bad to come with that. But I think a huge downside of Twitter is the echo chambers that the algorithm pushes you into. Because you think about it, people have 280 characters to put a thought out. There's threads, but most people read the first or second of the thread, don't read the rest. So they're reading the quickest bites that want to get across context / a story with an opinion and a judgment.
Yeah.
In 280 characters. Now take that times 100 different people who are thinking along the final opinion of whatever that one example tweet there is. And now you read 100 of them from all these other people. And now add that every day, repetition. You want to talk about being pushed into believing things? Holy shit, man. There's no better model than that. It's better. It is even better than like a visual like TikTok and Instagram, because you actually have to invest in both seeing and hearing and like literally watching how someone does it versus just reading a few quick words and scrolling.
Oh yeah. 100%. And I think that comes with inexperience too. Because if someone just looks at it and be like, oh, that's what it must be. Like people don't see the lies and the manipulation behind it and everything that goes into doing something like that, right?
100%. I think the general lack of self-awareness of the social media user, including myself at various points in my life for a long time, I would say, is rampant. Yeah. I mean, I don't have a percentage for you, but it's in the 90s. It's most people. And it's not very often, it's not at all their intention. It's just how it turns out. One of the things I do, and I'm very grateful to do a podcast like this where I talk with all different people. So I'm literally forced professionally to stay here. And I'm sure you can relate to that. You got to stay up kind of above the noise. But one of the things I do is I make sure I go down the rabbit hole of the left and the right. And I'll do it back to back even. And what's amazing is, what I mean by that is I'll go find certain trending tags that are more associated with one extreme or the other. Mm-hmm. And I will read through 100, 200 tweets just to see, and then read the replies and see what people are thinking. And every time I step back, and whenever it's something extreme like that, with very few, if any, exceptions, whatever the opinion is, I disagree with because I don't believe in extremes. So I think that whatever they're saying is most likely wrong as I go into it.
They're just adrenaline junkies, honestly.
Yes.
It's kind of weird, right?
It's very weird. Oh, it's very weird.
Like, how did you get to that point? Like, it's one thing to have beliefs. I respect that, Like, I respect everyone's beliefs and their thoughts and their opinions on what they think is right or wrong. But to be an extremist and actually go out and threaten people? Like, why?
That's a question I ask a lot. It's a question, and I don't think
Like, there's
I have a
definitely an
great answer.
insecurity there. Like, there's
Oh, yeah.
definitely...
There's some obvious points like that. Yes.
Like, everyone has insecurities, right? Not that we would admit it,
Yes.
publicly all the time. You have insecurities. I know I have insecurities. Everybody has insecurities. But, like, to get to that point of, like, I'm going to go out of my way to threaten you because you don't believe in what I believe in. Like, you're stupid, you're wrong, I'm right. It's nonsensical.
The thing is, when I will finish down a rabbit hole of one of them, and I know my opinion on the issue,
Yeah.
I then think about it, and I say, okay, assuming I didn't have an opinion or didn't have a good evidence-backed opinion before I read that, and assuming I went into it without realizing I was reading an extreme, without knowingly, like, I am going to go, because it's a plan for me, I'm going to go read what the right has to say. I'm going to go read what the left has to say. When I take all that apart and then ask myself at the end of whatever it is I was going through, ask myself, do I buy the arguments that were just made? The answer is almost always more yes than no.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Because what happens is, it's like anything else. It's like a repetition. You read it over and over, things can sound better and better as you go, and you can then start to believe it. Now, I step back out and I go, okay, well, that was all horseshit, right? But in thinking about it at the first point, like, unbiased guy, if I had gone in there unknowingly, read it, would I kind of buy this? Yeah, I would. And it goes to show you, I can read back to back the opposite opinions on something. And like, I'll do it with the vaccines all the time now. I can read the left and the right on vaccines and think that you are the dumbest person ever if you don't get it, or you are the dumbest person ever if you get it when I'm done reading them.
Yeah.
Because the way the other thing is, there's a lot of fake data put in there. There's a lot of fake bullshit to bolster your argument, whether you are going to be proven right or wrong by history aside. I don't know. I'm saying they will back up things just to make their case, and they will use anecdotes. And you're not thinking like, oh, I mean, I am, but for many parts of my life, I never thought like, oh, this is an anecdote. Like,
Yep.
you remember, what was the one, because everyone was fighting over when Trump joined the campaign in 2016 or in 2015 and made immigration a big thing. They were fighting over that, and that's still obviously like this whole argument. But there was one case, this is just a really good example. There was like a woman who was killed, I want to say in San Francisco, which was like a sanctuary city.
In 2016?
No, she had been killed in like 2013, 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. And my point is, I'll find out what it was, but people could look it up. They used it in every immigration argument about why we can't have immigration, because look what they did to Megan or whoever she was. It's like, you hear that and you're like, oh my God, this is a disaster. They're all bad. Then you think about it and you're like, okay, not good that whoever did that was let in here. We can all agree with that. Maybe the system needs some fixing because of that. But does that mean that they're all like that? No. You know what I mean? Like, it's good and it's bad. And so what you end up hearing is people are like, we can't have any of it. We're scared of it. Or we need all of them. They're all good people. They want to be here in America. And they use those little anecdotes instead of some pragmatism, along with some good old human emotion, which you need some of. They don't combine those two. It's just one or the other. And things like Twitter, to me, totally reinforce that. It's the best example, in my opinion.
100%. And I think it's more human emotion than anything else. At least from what I've seen, like if you asked me before, like, oh, what's going on in the world today? I'm like, I have no idea. I don't have cable. I don't listen to the news. Like, I will go into an argument like that completely unbiased. Like, I don't lean right, I don't lean left. I really don't know much about politics to begin with, Like, I'm just a kid in a candy store. I'm just happy to be here, right? You're just watching all of this go down. And you were right, you take bits and pieces. You're like, oh, I agree with that. I kind of disagree with that. But then you take a step back and you're just like, is it all crazy? Like, are people, like, is this all bullshit? I don't know. So that's why it's just easier to stay out of it altogether, right?
It is easier. And it's kind of nice, too, when you do it.
And that's one of those things
weird,
that's
though.
easier, and it's okay. You know, some
It's-
people be like, you know, you got to choose your hard, right? Like that's something that's. I'm okay not knowing that. I'm okay
You
not
gotta
having
choose your what?
your hard. You ever hear that analogy?
You're
Just
giving me
like,
some good phrases today.
see, choose your hard. Like if you like going to the gym's hard. Being out of shape though, and just feeling like shit all the time, that's hard too. Choose your hard, right? Going on a mile jog, that could be hard if you don't run, but it's also hard just sitting there. Like that's another gym excuse. How about, going out after a job, like you leaving a comfortable job to pursue your passions must have been hard at first.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was hard mentally staying there because you knew you weren't getting the most out of everything that you wanted in your life. You thought there was more.
I think it's first of all, I love that phrase. That's another one I'm gonna use. That's great. But I think it needs to be way more nuanced with politics, because with politics it's like your team A or your team B, and that's what they tell you have to be. And that is such a ridiculous thing.
I had because last year over, in COVID, everybody locked in their homes, especially here in the tri-state area.
I think we said this, but you're out in Arizona.
I was, and I had to come home because I was a senior at school and they were kicking everybody out. My plan was to stay there, and then they started closing down all of these restaurants, and I'm like, I gotta eat. So I went home for the summer, lived at my parents', and to make money, doing the podcast is one thing, and I think that time, you used it wisely. A lot of other people used it wisely to not create content, but again, like find what makes you tick. Again, like we were saying before, like figure out who you are. You're only going to get better out of this. Like you're not going to get better sitting here watching Netflix for 6 months.
No, you're not.
But at one point I started doing like online surveys just to make some extra cash. Right?
You were doing online surveys?
It's easy. It's like give your opinion and they'll give you $125 for like 2 hours of your time, like a 2-hour Zoom call.
Where do you do that?
There's ones like hivemind.com. Like there's all of these different sites. Like if you look up online surveys for money, they'll hook you up. Just make accounts.
So you get like
easy.
a couple hours, you get $125.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, you might get rejected. Be like, oh, this doesn't suit you. Try some other survey. Like it has to like fit. Like okay, between 18 and 25 years old, lives in this part of the country. You have relatives that work in hospice, pharmaceuticals, whatever. Like whatever fits the bill for their survey. What feedback they're looking to get. And almost every single time I set up a call to try and, apply for one of these calls was, are you a Democrat or are you Republican? And I'm always like, I really don't really mess with politics. I never really have. Like, I'm pretty neutral. Like, I agree with some things here, I agree with some things there. And they're like, but, if you had to pick one, Democrat or Republican, I'm
The
like
asteroid.
Well,
that's what I'm thinking.
If I had to choose, like I guess I'd say I'd lean Republican, and there's like, oh, okay, Republican. Just like, did I say something wrong? Like I told you, I don't lean either way.
What?
It's almost like a wrong thing to say.
Side note, why did we do that? Like, why has society done that? It's because I see that all the time from like people I know who are not on this podcast necessarily, but like when I'm talking with them, although I've seen it a couple times on this podcast too, where they're like, well, I lean right, like a little. And I'm like, that's fine.
Yeah.
I have Mike Spear on this podcast. Like, you can say whatever the fuck you want, but they're like afraid to say it. And for whatever reason, we've created this narrative in society, and it makes you have to like defend the right rather than the left, because like the left has kind of the control of the narrative, like in media. It's this other narrative that, God forbid, you lean a little bit to the right. That's like a quiet thing. You gotta be quiet about it.
You're a menace.
You're a menace. You can't say that. That's fucking insane. That's insane. Because, by the way, still, even today, I'm convinced the majority of people are in that middle, like 40 to 50%, right? So if it's 0 to 100, right to left, left to right, they're in that, say, 30 to 70 area.
And those are all the people who don't have Twitter accounts.
That's the
They're
other
kind
problem.
of off the grid. They're not speaking up.
That's the other problem.
That's because they're humble. So it's kind of a double-edged sword when you think about it. Like, they're good people, but at the same time, like, we could really use your voice in this situation. Like, if we had a president that, like, literally just brought both parties together and actually worked on bringing the country and the people together as one collective unit the way it was intended to be, just imagine where we'd be. It's literally just, like you were saying, side A, side B. You know, it's like the Yankees and the Red Sox, the Devils and the Islanders, the Cowboys and the Eagles, whatever you want to call it. You know, like you're on a team. And our ambition is to show how we're the better team, right?
Every example that you're listing off right there, I agree with, and it seems like it should be common sense. The problem is profitability. And it's not like, you know, you go right to like corporations with shit like that. Corporations are like a part of the whole political picture, of course, that pay off everything. But I'm saying, from a political standpoint, a happy society is not a profitable society. These parties and these forms of thought, of which it has become two as the sole choice, they exist on the idea that they can create a common enemy in one other side that they can point to. And so what they do is they convince all of us as a collective, the two of them, they convince all of us that we are different along certain lines so that we can stare at each other, hate each other for those things, and ignore all the problems that continue to boil down our way from the top, which is them.
Yep.
And in the process,